Somebody hide the wine list before the janitor hurts himself with it. The table laughed. Madeline Cross laughed with them and checked the door for the fourth time. She had told the hostess to leave the worst chair open, the one at the end, half behind a pillar. So 16 investors could watch a single father who mopped their floors squint at a menu he couldn't read. At 7 o'clock exactly, the door opened. The laughter stopped before anyone understood why. Wesley Hart walked in wearing a black tuxedo, and the investor who had made the joke stood up to shake his hand. Wesley Hart was in the building by 4:40 every morning, which was when the 14th floor belonged to him. He liked it then. The elevators ran empty. He wiped down the long conference table before anyone had touched it, aligned the chairs by eye, checked the pictures, and replaced the whiteboard markers that had gone dry. Nobody had asked him to check the markers. He did it because a dry marker cost somebody 4 minutes in a meeting that had been scheduled for a month. I was 38. He had been doing this for 4 years, and in 4 years he had learned the rhythm of Crosswell Industries better than most of the people who ran it. He knew which vice presidents came in early because they were behind and which came in early because they wanted to be seen. He knew all of it the way a man knows the sound of his own house at night, and he never mentioned any of it to anyone. The night supervisor, Grant Whitfield, offered him the overnight rotation twice that spring. Better pay less foot traffic. Wesley turned it down both times, without explaining why, and Grant stopped asking. Around 9 each evening, Wesley stepped into the stairwell. With his phone said 3 or 4 sentences in a voice that belonged to somebody else entirely, and came back with the same face he had left with. Madeline Cross was 32. She ran the company, and she had never once wondered what Wesley Hart did before he worked there. She was good at her job. That was the part people got wrong about her later. She read a room fast. She made decisions without needing to be liked for them. And she had taken a company that was drifting and pointed it at logistics infrastructure at exactly the right moment. Her father's name was on the building, but the Northgate corridor was hers. $590 million, 4 states, 11 distribution nodes. What she was not good at was the thing she believed she was best at. She thought she could read people. What she could actually read was titles, and she had never noticed the difference because the two had lined up her entire life. So when Wesley came in to collect the glasses, she did not stop talking. She kept the numbers going, the ports, and the tonnage and the carrier contracts at a normal volume, and she did not experience it as a decision. She left her coffee where it was instead of handing it to him, because handing it to him would have required looking at him. When a stack of printed decks was finished with, she slid it toward the end of the table with 2 fingers so he would find it there. Once in April, a senior director named Paul Rennick was mid-sentence about carrier margins when Wesley pushed the cart through the door. Paul stopped and glanced at Madeline, the way people do when they are asking permission. Madeline looked at Wesley, emptying the bin under the credenza, then back at Paul. "Keep going," she said. It was not trust. She would have called it efficiency if anyone had asked. The truth was worse, and she did not believe the man. Changing the trash bag could follow a word of it, so there was nothing to protect. Wesley heard the pause, the permission, and the 2 words that closed it. He tied off the bag, set a fresh one in the bin, and moved to the next room. I had a rule about this, and the rule was old. Years ago, he had decided that if people did not ask, he would not tell. He had dressed it up as dignity for a long time. It was not dignity. It was pride wearing better clothes, and it had cost him things. He could count the promotions. He never went after the apartment on the wrong side of Aurora, with the window that never sealed right. The arithmetic he did at the kitchen table on the 15th and the 30th of every month, with a pencil in his hand, out of habit. He knew what the rule had cost. He kept it anyway, because breaking it would have meant admitting he had been wrong about it for a very long time. There were 3 things Wesley noticed that spring that meant nothing to him at the time. The first was the 14th floor conference room. On Tuesday evenings, the lights stayed on past 8, sometimes past 9, and the room came up empty on the shared calendar. Wesley had to reorder his route because of it cleaning 16 before 14 instead of the other way around, and he wrote the change in the small spiral notebook he kept in his back pocket so he would not lose track of which floors he had done. He wrote down 4 Tuesdays that way. The second was a secure destruction request. There was a procedure at Crosswell for confidential disposal. A locked bin. A signed form. A 2-signature chain. And it was supposed to happen during business hours. Twice that spring, the request came in after 7 at night, with a single initial on the line out of procurement, and Wesley waited 40 minutes in the corridor with his cart before the room was released to him. He remembered the waiting more than the form. The third took 5 minutes, and he forgot it the same day. A technician from IT stopped him at the workstation outside the 14th floor conference room. A young man in a support polo with a laptop under his arm, and said he needed a facilities account to verify cleaning system permissions on the floor terminals. Wesley logged in. The technician typed for a while, thanked him, and said the ticket had already been approved upstairs. Wesley signed the tablet, where he was told to sign it, and went back to work. It was the kind of thing that happened in that building 40 times a week. Cynthia Vale had been at Crosswell for 12 years. She was 45. She ran procurement, and 2 years earlier, she had been the internal candidate for chief executive. The board had gone the other way. They had gone with 13 years younger, who had the family name, and they had told Cynthia she was invaluable where she was, which is what boards say. She did not fight it. She did not resign or leak or complain to anyone who mattered. She stayed, she smiled. She ran her division well enough that nobody looked at it twice, and somewhere in that first year, she stopped thinking of the company as something she served, and started thinking of it as something that owed her a balance. What she did after that, she did not experience as betrayal. She experienced it as collection. And collection is a thing a person can do calmly for years, in good clothes, without ever once feeling like a criminal. In the Northgate sessions that spring, when Madeline walked the leadership through the cost model page by page, Cynthia was the only person in the room who never took a note. Nobody noticed. There was no reason to. She had seen every number before it reached the room. The dinner came up in the last week of August. Alder and Stone had a private room on the water, and Crosswell had booked it for a Saturday. 16 seats. Seats everyone whose signature or money touched Northgate. It was not a celebration. It was the last table before the last stretch, the kind of evening where a deal either holds together or starts coming apart over the second bottle. Wesley came in at the end of the planning meeting to collect glasses. Madeline was still at the table with Paul Rennick and Cynthia and 2 others, and the conversation had drifted from seating charts to the wine program. Paul was the one who said it. He watched Wesley stack the glasses and said that if they were going to keep discussing a place like that in front of the help, somebody ought to warn the kitchen to print a simpler menu, one with pictures. 3 people laughed. Cynthia's laugh was short, and she looked down at her phone immediately afterward, which was the sort of thing nobody would remember for weeks. Madeline did not laugh. She watched Wesley work, and something occurred to her that she would spend a long time being unable to explain. She wanted to see it. Not to be cruel exactly, she would have called it curiosity. She wanted to know what happened when you took a man like that and put him inside a room like this one, among people who had spent their whole lives learning which fork and which vintage and which silence. She wanted to watch the seams show. "Wesley," she said. He straightened up. "Are you free Saturday night? Come to Alder and Stone with us." The table went quiet in the pleased way tables do when something is about to be funny. Wesley looked at the faces around it, at the smiles that had not finished leaving them yet, and then back at her. "As your guest," Madeline smiled. "Of course, just don't come in that uniform." The laughter came back louder than the first time. Wesley understood the invitation completely. There was nothing subtle in it, and nothing he had to work out later. He was not angry, and that surprised him a little, standing there with his hand on the cart. He had spent 4 years listening to people in that room say things they would never have said if they thought he was a person, and he found that he had used up all the anger a long time ago and had been running on something quieter ever since. 7 sharp, Madeline said. He could have not gone. He thought about it that week, the way a man thinks about a thing he has already decided. He knew exactly what she was waiting for, a janitor in a suit off a clearance rack, looking around for someone to tell him where to sit, ordering whatever the person to his left ordered, going silent. The moment the conversation turned to money, he had let people decide who he was for 4 years. That was the part he kept coming back to, not what they had decided, but how easy he had made it. He had told someone once and meant it that you should never make yourself smaller, so a room feels bigger. And then he had spent 4 years doing exactly that every morning at 4:40 and calling it dignity. On Saturday evening, he opened a box that had been on the shelf in the back of his closet since he moved into the apartment. Inside was a midnight black tuxedo cut for him, the kind of tailoring you cannot fake and cannot buy in a hurry. He did not think about where it came from. He took it out, checked the shoulders, and hung it on the door. He put on an old steel watch with a scratch across the crystal, adjusted the cuffs, and looked at himself in the hallway mirror where the light was bad. He did not look like a different man. That was the strange part. He looked like himself with something removed, and it took him a moment to understand that the thing removed was the effort. 4 years of making himself smaller had weight to it, and he had simply set it down. He drove himself in a 9-year-old sedan and parked 3 blocks away because the valet line was long. The room noticed before Madeline did. That was the sequence, and it mattered. The conversation at the near end of the table thinned out and stopped. And Ray Aldridge, who had put money into Northgate on the strength of a single meeting, and who had made the joke about the wine list 90 seconds earlier, stood up out of pure reflex, because that is what you do when someone who looks like that arrives late to a room like this. Madeline turned last. The tuxedo was the first thing she saw, and the smallest thing about it. What stopped her was the way he came into the room. He did not scan for a host. He did not slow down at the edge of the table where the suits got expensive. He did not perform the little routine of gratitude people put on when they know they are somewhere above their pay grade. Wesley shook Ray Aldridge's hand, said something to him. She could not hear, and took a seat. Not the chair behind the pillar. He did not appear to notice that chair existed. He sat where there was a place setting and put his napkin in his lap, and the sommelier came to him without being called. The surprise did not last. Within 10 minutes, it had turned into something closer to irritation. A good tuxedo and a steady walk did not change what a man did for a living. He had gotten through the door well. The door was the easy part. When the sommelier brought out the first bottle and began his introduction, Madeline turned toward the end of the table. "Are you all right, Wesley? I can order for you if the list is a little much." 2 people looked up. Wesley turned the label toward himself without any particular hurry, and when he set the bottle down, He said that the vineyard sat on the eastern slope, where the fruit ripened later than the valley floor, that the year in question had been a cool one, and the wine would be leaner than people expected, and that it would go badly with the first course, but very well with whatever came after it. The sommelier said that was correct, and that he had suggested holding the bottle for the second course for exactly that reason. Madeline felt the table shift half an inch away from her. The conversation moved to the West Coast freight situation, the delays out of Oakland and Tacoma, the carriers repricing mid-contract. "What about this?" she said, turning back down the table. "Are you keeping up?" Wesley answered without any edge in his voice. He said the container spot rates were misleading because the real cost had moved into the terminal handling side, that 2 of the West Coast ports had shifted their vessel windows in the spring, and that the schedule changes were pushing cargo onto lanes that had never been priced for that volume. Anyone modeling on last year's lane assumptions was going to be wrong in one direction only. Ray Aldridge put down his fork and asked a follow-up. Wesley answered that one too. Madeline began to feel something she had not planned for. She had invited this man to watch him fail to belong, and instead he had become the most interesting person at her table, and she was still the one who had brought him. By the main course, she had taken the room back. The Northgate summary went around on a single printed page, one for each seat, and she walked them through it. $590 million, 11 nodes. First cycle operating cost in 4 lines at the bottom. Then she looked down the table again. This part's a little more complicated. People inside the industry take years to get comfortable with it. Wesley did not respond to the tone. He had been reading the page since it reached him, which was the first time he had ever seen it. He asked whether the model was still running on the port handling schedule from before April. Madeline said her team had checked it. He said that was not quite what he had asked, and pointed to the 4 lines at the bottom. Ray Aldridge cut in, and he was not gentle. He said the April revision had been published months ago and was in every system in the industry. He said Madeline's strategy group was made up of people from very good schools who did this for a living. And he said he did not believe anyone had actually introduced the man doing the pointing. The room got uncomfortable. Wesley did not. He said the April schedule had gone into effect on time, and that was not in dispute. Then, he said, it had only applied to Group A terminals, and that Northgate routed through 2 Group B ports, where the old handling fees were still in force, and had been quietly revised upward in a separate notice. And then he said that if the number printed at the bottom of that page were a post-revision number, it would have to be at least 8% higher than it was. Nobody said anything. Ray Aldridge opened his laptop, which is not a thing men like Ray Aldridge do at dinner. He typed, scrolled, and read for a while with his hand over his mouth. When he closed it, he did not look at Wesley. He looked at Madeline. Wesley finished it quietly. If he was right, the true first cycle cost came in higher than the model by roughly $21 million. The silence went all the way down the table. An older investor near the middle finally spoke in the tone of a man expecting an impressive answer. "What does Wesley run at Crosswell?" Madeline heard her own voice come out flat. "He's a janitor." Nobody laughed. That was the part she would keep coming back to. 90 minutes earlier, the same sentence would have been the funniest thing anyone said all night, and now it landed in the room like something dropped on a hard floor. While the whole table looked at Wesley, one person did not. Cynthia Vale was watching Madeline, reading her face the way you read a screen, and when Madeline glanced up, Cynthia was already looking somewhere else. Madeline found him on the balcony after dessert, alone, with the water black behind him. "Where did you learn all that?" Wesley looked out at the water for a moment, and then he said the only thing he said to her that night, that was not about ports. There's a difference between inviting someone into the room and actually believing they belong in it. Then he thanked her for dinner and left. On Monday, Madeline told the strategy group to rebuild the model from source data instead of the working file. It took them until Wednesday. Wesley was right. The team had been checking formulas, not inputs, and the input was a cached fee table pulled the month before April. The exposure came in at $21,300,000, close enough to what a janitor had estimated at a dinner table with no laptop and no notes. The two of the analysts asked separately who had actually caught it. Madeline found him that afternoon on 16. She did not ask which floor he was working. "What did you do before Crosswell?" He was rolling up a cord, and he finished doing it before he answered. He had been a senior operations analyst, distribution and supply chain. He had built multi-state distribution models, run operating cost assessments, and presented directly to executive committees at companies about the size of this one. He had been on the road 4 nights a week doing it. Then there was a death in his family. The shape of his life changed in a single week, and the travel stopped being possible. He became a single father and left the job. He looked for the version of it that let him stay in one city and could not find one that paid. And eventually, he stopped looking and took something steady instead. Steady had turned out to be a building with clean floors at 4:40 in the morning. Madeline asked why he had never said any of it. Wesley put the cord on the cart. "You never asked." It was not delivered as an accusation. That was what made it land. He said it the way a man reports the weather, and it went through her cleanly. He had never hidden anything. There had been no performance and no long game. He had simply stopped volunteering, and she had filled in the rest by herself, and every limit she had ever placed on Wesley Hart had been placed there by her. She offered him a 90-day trial in operational strategy on the logistics risk assessment side. He did not take it right away. Written key performance indicators. Deliverables defined on paper or before the clock started. The same evaluation standard applied to him as to anyone else at that level. No allowances, because she felt guilty about a dinner, and no bar lowered because he had been pushing a cart the month before. If he could not do the work he wanted to be told, and removed like anybody else, Madeline agreed to all of it. Then he asked one more thing before salary ever came up, and it was whether the role had a fixed end to the day. She said that most weeks it did. He nodded and said that was fine, and she was left with the sense that she had missed something, because in every hire she had ever made, no candidate had asked about hours before money. It occurred to her that not asking was exactly the habit that had brought her here, and it still did not occur to her strongly enough to open her mouth. He started the following Monday. The floor was polite about it, and not much more. He was the chief executive's discovery. The story from the dinner. The guy who used to clean the room they were sitting in, and the strategy group treated his conclusions like claims that had to clear a higher bar. He learned to bring the underlying data to every meeting because his word alone did not move anything. Madeline was not innocent in this either. When he pushed back on a carrier assumption in his 3rd week, she asked him for supporting documentation she would never have asked Paul Rennick to produce. Wesley produced it without complaint. She caught herself afterward and said nothing to him about it. By day 55 of the 90 working through historical procurement to build the risk baseline, he found something he could not explain. Crosswell had lost a series of bids it should have won. Not many, and not all at once, spread across 2 years. Each time the company had a structural advantage on cost, and each time the margin of loss was small. Very small. He pulled 11 of them, and in 9, The pattern held Crosswell had come in under by an amount a competitor could only have hit by knowing the number in advance. The Northgate bid data was scheduled to lock in 5 days. If he was right, whoever was inside had one more window, and after the lock, there would be no reason for them to touch anything again. I went back to the notebook. It was still in a drawer at home, the small spiral one, with 4 years of route changes in it. He sat with it, and the access logs side by side, and the things he had written down, without understanding, began to line up. The 4 Tuesday evenings on 14, with the lights on, and nothing on the calendar 4 of those dates fell within a week of a lost bid. The 2 after-hours destruction requests with a single initial out of procurement, both logged within days of a competitor's win. 4 days. He pulled access records against closed project codes and found what he had half expected codes. Formally closed and still generating read activity months later, in small amounts at hours when nobody had a reason to be in them. He traced the account paths and the chain narrowed steadily toward one division. Everything ran toward procurement. 3 days. And here, Wesley made his mistake, and he did what? Because he was in a hurry. And being in a hurry was exactly the thing he had spent 4 years learning not to be. The access chain surfaced one name more often than any other. A mid-level procurement manager named Dale Ferris, whose credentials appeared on 6 of the 11 irregular sessions. Wesley took it to Madeline with the timeline and the codes, and Madeline convened a small meeting, and Dale Ferris sat across the table and listened to a man he barely knew describe what looked very much like a case against him. It took 2 hours to fall apart. Dale had been in Portland on personal leave for 2 of the 6 sessions with a hotel record and a signed leave request to prove it. His credentials had been active in Seattle both times, which meant his account had been used, not him. Wesley walked out of that meeting and stood in the corridor and understood exactly what he had just done. Not the embarrassment. The embarrassment he could carry. What he could not carry was that he had reached a conclusion about a man and then gone looking for support for it, which is the same procedure that had been run on him every morning for 4 years, and he had run it on somebody else the moment he had a little standing and a little pressure. I went home that night closer to quitting than at any point since the dinner. Cynthia Vale read the situation correctly from her own floor. Wesley Hart was 3 days from the data lock moving through her division, and he had just been publicly wrong in a room full of people. His credibility was thinner than it had ever been. In 2 more days, it would start to recover. So she did not wait. The next morning, confidential Northgate bid. Data left the company. It went out clean and it went out fast, and the security team had the trail inside 4 hours because the trail had been left to be found. Access logs showed the files opened. An email from an internal Crosswell account carried the attachments outbound. System history showed the transfer completing from the same account. The account belonged to Wesley Hart. Cynthia brought the report to Madeline herself in her capacity as the executive responsible for procurement integrity and recommended that his access be suspended immediately while legal was engaged. She was calm about it. She said it was a difficult thing to bring and that she wished she were wrong. Madeline signed the suspension order before she spoke to him. That was the part that mattered, and she did not feel the weight of it at the time. She signed at 11:40 in the morning. Cynthia presented the findings to 3 board members over a call at noon with Madeline, listening and saying almost nothing. And at 12:30, security walked Wesley Hart out of the strategy division and across the open office toward the executive corridor, past every desk in front of everyone he had spent 8 weeks proving himself to. Madeline stood behind the glass wall of the conference room and watched him go. She did not step out. She had a reason. And the reason was that legal had told her not to interfere with a live suspension. and the reason was true. And it did not matter at all. They brought him to her office and closed the door. The printouts were on the desk between them. The logs, the email, the timestamps. "Did you do this?" Wesley looked at the paper for a while. He had absorbed the laughter at Alder and Stone without much difficulty. He had absorbed 8 weeks of proving every conclusion twice. Neither of those had touched the thing this touched. The question was not the injury. The question was almost fair, and if she had asked it first, he might have answered it. She had asked it fourth. She had signed the order and let Cynthia speak to the board, and stood behind glass while a man was walked across a floor in full view. And only then, with all of it already done, had she come to ask him whether it was true. He took his badge off and set it on the desk. "After that night at Alder and Stone, I thought you'd started to see me." He looked down at the badge and pushed it an inch toward her. Turns out the only thing that changed was the title on this. He was out of the building by 1 o'clock. The position he had spent 8 weeks earning was gone. His professional name. The only asset he had left, from a career he had already walked away from once, was now attached to a data theft in an industry where 4 people know everyone. The $590 million contract sat on the edge of collapse, and the woman he had allowed himself to believe had finally gotten past what she thought. He had believed the first clean-looking page put in front of her. Wesley got home at 4 in the afternoon. He had not been home at 4 in the afternoon in 4 years. He set his keys down, stood in the kitchen for a while without turning the light on, and had nothing to say about how the day had gone. Madeline did not sleep. She took the file home and read it 4 times at the kitchen counter, and the more times she read it, the worse it sat. The evidence was too good. Every piece lined up on the first pass. The access log, the outbound mail, the transfer record, all of it available. Inside 4 hours, and none of it requiring interpretation. She had run investigations before. Real ones were messy. Real ones had gaps you argued about for a week. This one had been assembled like a presentation. The email was the second thing. She had read 8 weeks of Wesley's writing, and none of it sounded like the message in the file. He wrote in short declaratives, with the conclusion at the top. The email in the folder had a greeting, a closing line, and a hedge in the middle. The third was the file naming. The attachments used the internal convention a procurement had adopted 18 months earlier, Hood Code Fiscal Marker Revision Letter. Wesley had never used it once. She checked 11 of his documents to be sure, and the timing was too convenient to look at. Directly. The leak had landed the day after he was publicly wrong about Dale Ferris, at the exact hour his credibility was thinnest, which was either terrible luck or somebody's judgment. But the thing that kept her at the counter until 3 in the morning was none of those. She had suspended him before she asked him anything. She had done to Wesley precisely what he had done to Dale Ferris, with more power and less excuse, and without even a countdown to blame. In the morning, she hired an independent forensic examiner and told no one at Crosswell she had done it. Wesley did not wait for anyone to rescue him. He did not know she had hired anyone, and it would not have changed what he did that week. He had his notebook, 4 years of it, and he had the procurement work he had completed legitimately during the trial. Those were the only 2 things he owned outright. He put them together on the kitchen table and built the sequence properly this time from the evidence forward rather than from the conclusion backward. The after-hours cleaning tickets first. 14th floor 4. Tuesday's lights on calendar empty. Then the destruction requests with a single initial. Then the closed project codes, still generating read activity, which he had pulled during the trial, with authorization, and could account for line by line. Then the 11 losses across 2 years, 9 with margins, so narrow, a competitor could only have hit them holding Crosswell's number in advance. Every irregularity converged on the division Cynthia Vale controlled. Not on a person, on a division. He kept that distinction in front of him the entire week. He had made a man sit in a room for 2 hours because he let a pattern become a name too early, and he was not going to do it again. He also could not close it. The structure proved that someone with procurement authority had been moving inside the bidding process for 2 years, and it proved nothing about the one fact that mattered to him personally, which was that the transfer had been executed with his credentials. He could show access. He could not show how his own account had been taken. Madeline called on the second day. He let it ring out and called back an hour later. He agreed to meet on one condition, which was that it would not happen at Crosswell. She chose Alder & Stone. She was aware of what she was doing, and she did it anyway. The same private room on the water where she had told the hostess to leave the bad chair open, where Ray Aldridge had made his joke about the wine list, where she had sat with her hand on her glass and watched a man refuse to be what she had invited him there to be. This time, when Madeline came through the door, Wesley was already there at the table with a folder in front of him and a glass of water he had not touched. He did not stand up. He presented first. There was no anger in it, and no theater. He laid the timeline out flat, 1 page at a time, and read it the way he would have read it to a committee 8 years ago. The Tuesday evenings, the destruction requests, the closed codes, the session timestamps, the account paths, then the 11 bids and the 9 impossible margins. He stopped there and said the part he had learned the hard way, that the pattern ran into the division Cynthia Vale controlled, that this was not the same thing as saying she had done it, and that he was not going to say the second one until somebody could show him the connection he was missing. Madeline listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she took a bound report out of her bag and set it on the table. The examiner had found the missing link on the second day. Wesley's credentials had genuinely sent the data. That had never been in question. What the internal team had not checked, because they stopped the moment the account name resolved, was where the session originated. It had not come from Wesley's laptop. The transfer ran through a remote desktop session initiated from a workstation on the procurement floor, a machine assigned to Cynthia Vale and registered to her since the previous year. The planted email had been composed on the same machine 11 minutes before it went out. Both events sat inside a 2-hour window during which Cynthia's badge had cleared the floor entrance and had not cleared it again. The only remaining question was how she had obtained his credentials, and the examiner had found that too in a support ticket from the spring. Crosswell ran single sign-on. When Wesley moved divisions, his identity had carried over unchanged. Only his permissions were raised. The password captured from a facilities account. In April still opened the strategy account that account had become, and the capture had happened during a permissions verification on the 14th floor terminals in a session approved at the executive level by Cynthia Vale. Wesley read that line twice. He remembered the man in the support polo with the laptop under his arm. He remembered signing the tablet where he had been told to sign it, and the whole thing taking about 5 minutes and forgetting it before the end of his shift. He had handed it over himself in April, standing next to his cart. 7 months before there was anything worth stealing, and 4 months before anyone at Crosswell had said his name in a sentence that was not an instruction. Madeline understood the second part of it before he said anything. The reason Cynthia had used a facilities login in the spring was not that she had planned this. It was that a facilities login had been the easiest thing in the building to take, because nobody watches what a janitor's account can reach. She had collected it the way you pick something up off a table. It had only become valuable later when the man attached to it was moved into a room where the data was. Madeline convened legal and the board that evening. It moved faster than either of them expected because forensic reports assembled by outside examiners leave no room for negotiation. Cynthia Vale was suspended before 9 o'clock. Her access revoked at the network level while she was still in the building, and the file transferred to formal investigation with counsel present. She did not deny anything in the room. What she did instead was worse, and she did it on her way out when there was nothing left to protect. She said that nobody was ever supposed to believe a janitor could find it. That was the sentence that finished it for Madeline, and it did not finish it the way Cynthia intended. Cynthia had not chosen Wesley at random. She had chosen him because the story wrote itself. A man pulled off a cleaning cart and dropped into the strategy division inside a weak-handed confidential bid data. He had no business holding who then sold it. It was clean. It was the kind of thing people repeat without checking, because every person who heard it would supply the ending on their own. And it had almost worked, and Madeline understood exactly why. It had almost worked because she had spent 4 years looking at Wesley Hart through precisely that lens. Cynthia had not invented the frame. She had borrowed it from the chief executive who had built it herself. One small decision at a time. A coffee cup left on a table, a stack of paper pushed toward the end of it, 2 words spoken over a man's head while he changed a trash bag. Keep going. The frame had been sitting there for years, fully assembled. Cynthia had only needed to put someone inside it. Wesley was cleared that week. The Northgate data was reissued under a new lock. The timetable slipped by 9 days, and the $590 million contract was signed with the corrected first cycle numbers, $21 million higher than the model Madeline had presented at that dinner and accurate for the first time. She asked to see him afterward, and he came to the building, and she had a contract on the desk in front of her. Director of Operational Intelligence. A new function reporting to her with authority over cross-divisional anomaly review. Wesley read the first page and set it down. If this is an apology, I don't need one. Madeline had prepared for that. She had prepared for most versions of this conversation, and this was the one she had hoped for. It isn't, she said. This is a job Crosswell needs done, and you're the person who can do it. I'd be an idiot to give it to anyone else. He took the position on the same terms he had taken. The trial written indicators. Defined scope evaluation standards on paper and identical to those applied to every other director in the building. He read all of it before he signed and asked for 2 changes, and she made both. She noticed this time that he still did not ask about salary until the end. There was no ceremony and no announcement built around the story. She had thought about one and decided against it because the version of this that ended with a chief executive giving a janitor. His chance was a version she no longer had any appetite for. She had not given him anything. She had spent 4 years failing to notice an operations analyst standing in her own conference room. And then she had finally hired the best qualified person available, which was a thing she should have done years earlier and had been prevented from doing by nobody but herself. Over the following months, Wesley built the thing he had been hired to build. Operational intelligence produced nothing anyone could put in a press release. It was a reviewer that read procurement access, scheduling, and facilities data against each other. A sentence that means very little until you understand that no division at Crosswell had ever looked at another division's noise before. Bid patterns against badge records, project code activity against calendar occupancy, after-hours service requests against everything. It caught 3 things in the first 4 months. None of them were fraud. 2 were processors that had been quietly costing money for years, and 1 was a vendor billing error large enough that the recovery paid for the function twice over. But the larger change was not in the system. It was in Madeline, and it was small, and it did not happen all at once. She stopped leaving her cup on the table. It was the first thing she caught herself doing, and the easiest to fix, and carrying it out herself took alien seconds. She stopped talking over people. When the cleaning crew came through a meeting, she stopped the sentence, said the person's name, and waited. And the first time she did it, the room looked at her as though she had done something strange. And when Paul Rennick made a joke that winter about somebody's assistant, the kind that would have gotten a laugh in any conference room in that building in March, she did not laugh, and she did not let it move past her. She said one sentence about it without heat, and the meeting went on. And that was the end of jokes like that on the executive floor. 3 things. She did not think of herself as transformed. She thought of herself as someone who had been given an expensive education by a man who never once raised his voice at her. On a Thursday in December, Wesley's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Alder and Stone. Saturday night, he looked at it for a while before he answered. "You want to check which fork I use again?" Madeline read that standing in her office with the lights off and the building mostly empty. She read it several times and understood that he had every right to send it and that she was going to have to live with having earned it. Then she typed the answer. "No. This time I just want to have dinner with Wesley Hart." On Saturday, he went back to the same private room on the water where she had once sat waiting for him to walk in and be a joke. Nobody was waiting for him to prove anything. Halfway through dinner, she repeated the line he had said to her on the balcony about the difference between inviting someone into a room and believing they belong in it. She told him she had seen the uniform for 4 years before she ever saw the man inside it, and that she had no defense for it and was not going to construct one. Wesley did not need her to admire him. He had never become anyone else. The intelligence was there when he wore the tuxedo. It was there when he was holding the mop. Dignity belongs to a person before their position gives you a reason to hand it over.